Several times the night before, Shirley had called the jailhouse, and the desk people told her they couldn't bring me down to the phone. I was too drunk to make any sense anyway. When I was arrested, the cops hauled my bike away and impounded it. With only a few bucks to spare, Shirley knew to bail out the bike first and leave me in jail. She knew that once I sobered up, I'd eventually get out. I was released after a couple of days, and I ended up in front of a judge on a drunk driving beef and a first-hand lesson on how nutty the courts can be. The guy just ahead of me was in the Navy and was fighting a similar charge. He pled guilty. The judge handed down a suspended sentence, then let him go. Hell, I figured I'd get the same treatment, so I went ahead and pled guilty too. I wasn't so lucky. I got 90 days and a $250 fine. The judge suspended 60 days toward probation, but I still had to do the 30. They were supposed to haul my sorry ass to Santa Rita. Santa Rita was not too far from Oakland, where the suburbs are now, off old Highway 50, now Interstate 580. It was part of the Alameda County jail system, a minimum security operation housing both male and female prisoners. It's best known as the destination for students busted on the UC Berkeley campus during the free speech movement riots. A lot of Hell's Angels have also passed through Santa Rita's doors. On my way to Santa Rita, we stopped at the Alameda County Courthouse in Oakland, where, after a cop fuck-up, I spent 2 days in a special county jailhouse unit. They didn't usually keep someone like me, a first offender, in such a facility. But there I was, an 18-year-old in a 4-man cell with 2 other dudes, both charged with double homicides. One was a black guy who was on his way to the gas chamber. He had killed his girlfriend and her boyfriend. The 2 killers asked me what I was in for. I told them about my drunk driving ticket. They didn't believe me. That's what I mean about a nutty system. 15 years later, in 1972, I ended up at the very same jail complex in Alameda County. I was in for the Aguero murder, and there were 2 other guys in my cell in for murder raps as well. Then they brought in this kid about 18 years old. I asked him what he was in for. He had stolen his girlfriend's mother's credit card and taken off to Hawaii. He asked me what I was in for. Murder, I told him. Murder? Just like me earlier, this kid did a double take and tried to hide that he was scared. In fact, he was so scared, if they had let him go the next day, I don't think he ever would have been in trouble again for the rest of his life. But the judge gave him 90 days observation in Vacaville. I was still in the same jail when he came back 3 months later, a fucking gangster. If only they had let him go, those 90 days of prison wouldn't have turned him into a thug. But once you've been to prison, done your time, and adapted to the system, they can't scare you anymore. When I finally got to Santa Rita, the captain called me into the office and told me that just because I was a Hell's Angel, they weren't going to treat me any different from any other prisoner. So I asked him, "Do you call every other prisoner in here to tell them that?" He said, "No." "Well then," I said, "you're treating me different right out the gate." That pissed him off. My first jail term at Santa Rita wasn't so bad. I worked in the motor pool, and since I knew about bikes, I serviced the motorized lawnmowers. The system didn't turn me into a gangster because I was already pretty set in my ways. I just wanted to ride motorcycles and have fun. Still, in 1957, being in jail marked me with the straight world. But I was riding motorcycles with the freewheelers, the kind of guys who worked a little and earned just enough to have a good time. I was running around with guys who couldn't give a fuck what anybody else thought of them, let alone whether or not I'd been to jail. I'd been in and out of jail for lots of things, but jail had never shaken me. It wasn't until I was sentenced to prison after admitting to selling drugs during the Aguero trial that the prison system swallowed me up. I found the prospect of spending the rest of my life in prison a tough, though not impossible, pill to swallow. After conviction and sentencing, I was transferred to Vacaville Correctional Facility. Vacaville is a prison guidance center, a California medical facility stopping point. If you're from Northern California, that's where they classify you and decide which facility they'll send you to next. For some reason, Vacaville housed more girls than any other joint in California. Although I was 32 years old, I did a double take when I first saw a bunch of transvestites locked up there. Man, I thought I'd seen it all, but these guys looked exactly like women. It was too weird. I was prepared to take whatever punches they threw at me. I considered myself a tough bird. Being in prison isn't the worst thing in the world. They can lock you up, but they can't take away the freedom in your mind. My mind could adjust to anything. I couldn't sit around crying, missing my bike. Besides, you never knew what might happen. One day you might be doing life, the next day you might be free. I knew how to fight in court just like I did in the biker bars. Then I ended up in Folsom Prison. They call Folsom the warehouse. If you're stuck in Folsom Prison, it's usually because you're in serious trouble. Practically everybody in Folsom is doing life and hard time, and inmates rarely, if ever, are paroled out early. If you're doing only 5 or 10 years, chances are you worked your way through the other penal systems and no other prison would take you. Because they wanted to maintain the notoriety of Folsom, the state prison establishment dubbed it the last stop. Folsom is California's second oldest prison, originally built on land furnished by the railroad. Its original granite walls are world famous, surrounding 5 general population cells. Its location was selected because of the amount of native rock in the area, which the early inmates broke into small pieces for the wall's construction. The American River not only offers a water supply, but serves as a natural boundary. The prison was originally designed to hold inmates serving long sentences, habitual criminals, and incorrigibles. Folsom's best-known industry is its license plate factory. I was now a confirmed 15th-to-lifer in the California state prison system. I hung in Vacaville for a 90-day stretch, during which I was in 17-hour lockup. I was president of the Hells Angels. I was headed for Folsom's maximum security. During my first week in Folsom, the indictments continued to roll in. The feds indicted me on income tax evasion and 3 more gun charges. I pled guilty and made a deal, and the judge offered to run those extra sentences concurrent with my state prison term, which the federal prosecutors also agreed to. If I served a certain amount of years on the state crimes, they would take care of my federal beef simultaneously. In the long run, that turned out to be a big break for me. The feds usually don't go for that kind of arrangement, but they figured I was in for good. All my guilty pleas saved them a lot of court time. Up until Folsom, I'd never done a day of prison in my life, only county jail. In county, I was in a cell 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To me, prison had to be better than county time. I'd been in the Army, so prison became just another experience full of rules and commands. Being a Hells Angel was a heavy part of my prison life. The state of California rode tough on bike clubs, so I probably knew 100 inmates in Folsom, and there were probably 50 to 75 hardcore bike riders inside at any one time, and we stuck together. The security level of a prison defines the movements of its inmates. Prisoners in San Quentin are out of their cells at different intervals throughout the day. Folsom had no night movement, 0. At 8 o'clock in the morning, you could be out on the yard, but by 3 in the afternoon, it was lockup, and that marked the end of your day. Folsom was the only maximum security prison in the state at the time. San Quentin, although it was a prison, wasn't a max, though they had other ways of dealing with screw-ups. If you were a troublemaker at Q, they'd keep you inside your cell by welding the door shut. Months later, maybe they'd grind it open. I mostly hung out with the motorcycle riders in the joint. Out of all the bikers, the most Hells Angels that were at Folsom at any one time was 5 or 6 of us. Having other Hells Angels inside helped a lot. You hate to see your brothers inside, and you're glad to see them go home, but it's fun having them there. We'd see each other every day except during lockdowns. There was Foo, Marvin, Grubby Glenn, Whitey, and me. Doug the Thug was in and out and shipped back and forth from San Quentin. Other bikers like Billy Maggot and Brutus also came from San Quentin. It was called bus therapy. When there were problems, race hassles, drugs, violence, whatever, in San Quentin, They'd grab everybody and ship them out, keeping their actual location in bureaucratic limbo. Bus therapy was another name for moving the problem rather than solving it. Motorcycle riders consisted of both club members and regular riders. There were lots of clubs inside. Satan slaves, gypsy jokers, whatever club was around had someone inside. In prison, different club members knew it was time to get along. In prison, we didn't have rival clubs. After 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the only time you were let out of your cell was when they needed you to be somewhere. Even then, you were under escort, since nobody was allowed on the yard alone after 3 o'clock. When I first got to Folsom, there was a big confrontation between whites and blacks on the yard. The bullets started flying. I didn't know who or what the fuck they were shooting at, so I hit the dirt, hoping I wouldn't get shot. I soon learned. When you see two opposing groups separating on the yard, and if they start walking toward each other, either jump into one of the groups or get on the fucking ground. Anybody out on the yard at night alone was shot. If you ran in the yard, you were shot. If you fought in the yard, both of you were shot. No warning. When shit happened in Folsom, they'd kill you on the spot, then sort things out later. It was a part of the joint's mean-ass rep. In 1973, you still couldn't have Playboy magazines. No televisions were allowed. Small radios with earphones were okay as long as they were battery-operated. In one building where I lived, there was no hot water. Every morning you were issued hot water in a bucket to shave with. By the summer of 1975, things began to relax a little. Dress codes and magazine restrictions were loosened, and even TVs were allowed. Well, you won't believe this. Long hair and mustaches are in Folsom. I sure wish my hair would grow faster, but I know one thing for sure. No more haircuts while I'm here. July 8th, 1975, letter to Sharon. Because I had been the president of the Hells Angels, the cops treated me different. They talked to me a little nicer. There was a rule that no more than 5 people could hang out as a group. One time we were on the yard, and there were 8 or 10 of us lying on the ground, shooting the shit. The cop came over and took all our ID cards. I got in the cop's face a little bit about it. He eventually came back and gave us all our cards back. A friend of mine worked at the detail office where the cons and the staff conducted business. He asked me if I knew why we got our ID cards back so fast. I learned that the cops were ordered not to confront me in front of other inmates on the yard. Supposedly because of my influence with other prisoners, I could start a riot. I guess you could say that even though I was playing it cool, I was still a leader of sorts. Once in the hobby shop, I made a silver club ring. I was wearing it on the yard when one of the gun towers spotted a glint of metal on my person. He radioed down for the cops to grab me. Rather than confront me on the yard, they called me into the detail office and searched me for a knife. They wanted to take the ring, but I refused to give it up without a receipt. The only person who could give me a receipt was the captain, so they would have to write me up for an infraction for wearing a club ring. Later I took it up as a grievance in front of a staff hearing. My case was they sold me the stuff, let me make it in the hobby shop, and there was nothing in the regulations preventing me from wearing it. Rather than destroy it, they would keep it with my personal property until my release. I felt I'd won at least one battle. I never had to piss in a bottle until I got to Folsom, even though I was jailed in county on drug charges. They claimed they administered urine tests randomly, but my name seemed to come up at least twice and sometimes 4 times per month. Hell, I didn't care. I was clean. I kicked my cocaine habit cold turkey in county. If they wanted to keep testing me, fuck it. That only meant somebody else inside got away being dirty. Race problems in Folsom weren't as bad as San Quentin and Soledad. There may have been a few scrapes here and there, but everybody was doing life for long stretches, making do and getting along. We served time minding our own business. There were groups, white gangs, Mexican gangs, black gangs, and bike riders. Groups like the Aryan Brotherhood, La Familia, and the Black Guerrilla Family, BGF. While I had friends in every group, unfortunately in prison it all comes down to race, and you have to go with your own. That's the problem. You can't stay neutral. I handled the everyday boredom of prison by reading. I learned how to type and play the guitar. I had a single cell to myself the whole time I was inside. My attitude was, if you incarcerated me, you took care of me. When prison regs permitted men's families to bring them shoes and clothes from home, I insisted on wearing the sloppy clothes that the system furnished me. While most of the other prisoners' shoes were spit-shined military style, I wore my brown, scuffed-up shoes from the institution. Breakfast was at 6 o'clock in the morning. Then it was back to your cell. At 8 o'clock, they racked the gates. Guys working in the license plate factory reported in. You needed minimum custody status to work outside in the yard or out in the front grounds. There weren't a lot of gigs available, and to work a paying job, you needed a pay number, which I never had the whole time I was in Folsom. I didn't need one. My luck was that I knew an old convict named Zeke. I met Zeke in county, and we got along great. Zeke was a hardcore fucking criminal. The last time I saw anything on him was on the television show America's Most Wanted. He was on the run again. Zeke was in and out of the system quite a bit, but when I got to Folsom, there he was. Zeke gave me a quick matchbook education on how to live and exist in the big house. He went to the clerk and set me up with the job of jobs, working on the trash truck. Rather than being cooped inside, stamping out plates, making stop signs, doing time in the tool and die, or working the metal shop, I spent time outside, a primo situation, especially within the tense restraints of Folsom. It was the coolest gig on the grounds, and somebody had to do it. It might as well be Zeke and me. Each day everybody took the litter out of their cells. Then it was the job of the tier tenders to clean up the front of the tier and pile up the trash. Then another set of guys threw the piles of litter into large bins, 3 feet wide and 8 feet long, rolling them out for the trash truck. There were also 55-gallon containers, which the large bins were emptied into. Once the trash truck pulled into the yard, Zeke and I would lift the 55-gallon drums up and into the truck. The guys on the truck would empty the drums and hand them back down to us. That was it. Our gig was done in minutes. The thing about trash truck detail was that it had perks. During rainy day lockups, or if the fog rolled in, everybody was locked down unless, like us, you worked outside with a fog clearance. Thanks to my fog clearance, I could still go to the weight yard and do my exercises after loading the truck. Perks meant a lot in Folsom Prison. In the summertime, during droughts, showers were kept to a minimum. But because I worked trash truck detail, when I was through with my 10-minute job, I got to take a shower. After a while, I earned a pretty good clearance. Another bike rider friend of mine, Scotty the Tree Leaper, was sent to Folsom. He was a well-known armed robber and used to rob people in Golden Gate Park during the Summer of Love. Scotty would sit up on a tree branch, and when anybody walked by, he would jump down out of the tree and steal their money. I got Scotty permission to work the trash truck detail with me. When the death penalty got overturned in California, 90% of those on death row ended up in Folsom, usually in the general population. I actually found murderers to be okay people, like 2 black dudes named Death Row Slim and Motormouth. They were both pretty nice guys, even though they killed a convict in Folsom, a prisoner who was probably one of the toughest convicts, another black, in the prison system. He was a notorious informant and a homosexual. He would spit in people's faces, saying if he was a fucking rat, what the fuck were they going to do about it? He would get stabbed, take the knife away, beat up the perp, carry him into the detail office and rat him out. He was one bad motherfucker. He was so hyper, he used to mow the lawn running. But he disrespected Slim and Motormouth, so they waited behind a doorway one day with baseball bats. They broke his fucking knees and beat him to death. They wound up on death row, and when the death penalty was overturned, Slim and Motormouth ended up back in Folsom. They both worked with me on the garbage truck, and we became good friends. Because I was a veteran, I still had VA rights for extra education benefits. Volunteer teachers from the Cordova Adult School District were brought in to instruct prisoners. Technically, I felt anyway, making us eligible for GI benefits. So I applied for GI Bill benefits, and the state of California fought vigorously against me. I won. I received $350 per month in prison to go to school. I sent the money to Sharon, struggling on the outside. When it came time to sign up for school, the high school equivalency class was filled, while the elementary school was still wide open. I progressed from 4th grade through junior college in 2 years, eventually gaining my AA degree from the Sacramento City College system, while getting my GI benefits. Life could have been a heck of a lot worse. This coming week, I'll have finished my U.S. History, U.S. Government, and English 1A classes. I don't think I got less than a B in any of them, but won't know for sure until the end of the week. I'll let you know when I receive my grades. I'm going to take California History, California Government, and English 1B for the next set of classes. I guess I'm coming along all right in the classroom. The guitar books you sent are helping me a lot, too. The Dylan book was a little too heavy for me at the present stage of playing I'm in, but will come in handy later. The other two were just right. I've learned a few songs and how to play a little as a result of having them. January 2nd, 1975, letter to Sharon. Like I said, Sharon struggled hard on the outside just to get by. While she was considered my partner in crime, her visitation requests were routinely turned down. I had a few bucks set aside for her, but the money soon ran out. So Sharon did odd jobs and cleaned motel rooms at a place my friend owned. Anything to keep going. One time when the phone company shut off the telephone, the guys from the club installed a payphone at the house. You know what? I watched the Miss America contest the other night, as I have every year since I've been here. It is really too bad that I interrupted your career, as I haven't yet seen a girl in any of the contests that you couldn't beat, hands down. The postcard of you posing for the Santa Cruz advertisement puts every one of the contestants to shame. May 19th, 1975, letter to Sharon. Prison is a very, very noisy place. The noise level is always up. It's when it gets quiet that you know something's either going to happen or something just did. County jails, city jails, prisons. Every jail I've been in sounds exactly the same. A combination of machinery running, people talking, noise traveling through the ventilation system 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When that stops, or if the pitch changes and the human voices are gone but the machinery is still running, look out. Everybody knows something's about to pop. In 1977, somebody managed to sneak a gun onto the grounds. It was almost like the movies. They used a 6-year-old kid to help get the piece inside. A clerk helped run the front gate when supply trucks came in through the front gate to the canteen for deliveries, which were unloaded inside a short distance away from the visiting area. Cons were never allowed near the delivery trucks. But a visitor carrying a pistol sent the kid over to the idling truck with the gun. Since he was a little kid and nobody was paying attention, he managed to sneak underneath the truck and lodge the gun under the chassis. Once inside, the kid ran back under the truck and grabbed the gun. A hot piece was passed from one inmate to another until one guy, who had killed a couple of highway patrolmen, took possession. After killing 2 policemen, he knew he was never going to get out of Folsom. One day during the count, he told a guard, "I've got a gun in here and I want to surrender." The guard blew his whistle and the screws stormed in with 30-30 rifles. He was a no-good motherfucker, but he was set up for a transfer out of state, no longer safe inside the California system. What he left behind was a lockdown and absolute chaos for the rest of us. The lockdown procedure went down full tilt. Cops went through every bunk in the prison, every scrap of paper inside each and every cell. They threw tons and tons of paper and trash away. And of course, somebody had to load the trash truck. I've been getting outside for 2 or 3 hours each morning during lockdown. They take me and Scotty the tree leaper out each morning at 8 a.m. to load the trash truck, but it don't get here until 10 or 11 a.m. So we get to lay on the grass, soaking up the sunshine until it arrives. Really nice to get out of the cell, even for a few hours. They even feed us lunch because we're outside workers. Nobody else gets fed a lunch during lockdown. I'm also getting a lot of guitar practice during the lockdown. July 20th, 1977, letter to Sharon. It was a warm summer day and the prison was in an uproar. The commissary was closed. Nobody had privileges for 2 weeks. After trash detail, Scotty and I were out on the lawn. I saw the warden walking toward us with a group of state officials from Sacramento. The gun incident was a major hassle, as the screws were mad as motherfucking hornets, looking for anybody to step out of line. As the officials toured the grounds, here we were lying out in the sun, eating barbecued beef sandwiches. I acted like I didn't see the warden and spoke out loudly. Yeah, and when I write my fucking book about the 1977 lockdown, it'll be about how they had us in solitary confinement, stretched out on the racks, beating the shit out of us to find out if there's any more guns. The warden stopped and looked over at me. And you know, Barger, they're probably going to believe it too. 21 months after I entered Folsom, Sharon was finally permitted to visit me. She got into trouble immediately when the guards found a handcuff key on her keychain. Actually, she used a set of handcuffs to lock up her bike. Shirley also got in trouble because of an old trunk key on her keychain. The cops figured it might open a set of leg irons. Sharon's visiting room privileges were suspended. In 1976, Folsom Prison started up a conjugal visits program. The waiting list was very, very long. Finally, there was an opening on the schedule. Sharon was living with her brother in Santa Cruz when she received the frantic morning call from my lawyer. Sharon drove a white Econoline van, which doubled as a traveling legal office to help fight my appeal cases. She had a little desk bolted in the back to write up subpoenas and study documents. On the drive to Folsom, Sharon crushed up her Benzedrine tablets, spiked her Coca-Cola, and drank it down before reaching the prison grounds. A piece of sexy lingerie hung on the rearview mirror. The prison maintained a small trailer for the conjugal visits. Not exactly honeymoon conditions. While we were together inside, a school bell would go off inside the trailer, which meant I had to go outside for a count by the guards. It was sort of humiliating, but Sharon and I made the most of it and spent an entire weekend together. Afterward, I arranged for her to visit me more often. When Sharon was able to visit again regularly, she would bring messages to ask me what to do about club business. My answer was, I don't know. I'm in here. You're out there. Figure it out. Folsom proved to be an ultimate test for both Sharon and the Oakland club members. I missed over half of the 70s being inside. Sure, I thought about escape. I was serving a life sentence. I figured I owed the man 5 years for what I'd done. Once I got the 5 years in, I knew I was getting out. I didn't know when or how, but I knew I'd eventually win. By behaving myself, I worked toward getting my custody lowered. Going in, I was at max custody. Before I left, I was at the lowest custody. By lowering my custody, I could get shipped to a lower-level prison. I could soon be transferred to a minimum security facility, or I might just be able to walk away, Timothy Leary style. But I never had to plan my escape. All I had to do was jiggle the system. Soon it would come apart in tiny little pieces. Still pushing on the outside, Shirley and Sharon decided to contact San Francisco's most famous attorney, Melvin Belli, to try and spring me. They looked up the number in the San Francisco phone book and telephoned his office. A lawyer named Kent Russell worked in the Belli office at the time, and his job was to handle the unusual civil rights and criminal stuff. Belli took one look at the Hells Angel info and decided this one was right up Kent's alley. The fact that I was recharged and sentenced so quickly after beating the Aguero murder rap seemed fishy to me. While I was eligible for parole after doing 15 years of my sentence, that didn't mean they had to let me out until they were damned good and ready, or until I finished at least 30 years' time. They could hold me into the next century. The entire time I was in Folsom, we fought the effect of the marijuana prior. My 1963 felony marijuana beef was the foundation for the rest of my felony convictions. But Russell abandoned the previous tactic of attacking the consecutive sentences I received. We needed another angle to knock out the marijuana prior. Russell did some research. The record showed no evidence of what's called a Boykin-Tall waiver, which means that the defendant has to show he understands the consequences of his plea. The court, when it took my plea on the prior, did not read the waiver into the record. Now Russell saw a way to attack the underlying marijuana conviction. When I was convicted of marijuana possession, it represented the prior felony. But in the early 70s, it wasn't even a misdemeanor. The marijuana conviction was now a weak foundation charge, and the other sentences would soon crumble along with it. With the passage of SB 42, California state law banned indeterminate sentences. In response to the public's call for tougher sentencing procedures, Senate Bill 42 was passed calling for determinate sentences, meaning judges no longer had the leeway to give 5, 10, or 15 to life sentences. The prosecutors were in a big-time jam. Possession of 19 joints was no longer as serious in 1977 as it had been in 1963. So if the federal court eventually removed the marijuana prior, that knocked out the weapons violations because I was no longer a felon when I had them. Instead of the parole board, I was taken in front of the community release board to be resentenced, as if I were sitting in a courtroom. All my sentences combined now totaled less than the 5+ years I'd already served. The government sensed that we had a compelling legal argument and that we were going to win our appeal to overturn my 1964 grass bust. With little fanfare, the government folded up and pulled out of the case. According to the decree of the Community Release Board, I could be released within 120 days since my sentence was essentially served. I returned to my cell. An hour later, Lieutenant Buchanan told me I had to report immediately to the prison counselor's office. While I was there, I asked him if I could call my wife to arrange for some release clothes should I be let go. The counselor told me I didn't have time. He told me to call Sharon now and tell her to be at Folsom by 8 o'clock the next morning, by herself, and they would release me. I swallowed hard. In one day, I had just gone from a life sentence to going home the next morning. Normally, they shut down all inmate phone calls coming in and out of the prison if something hot, like my release, was going down. As I walked out of the counselor's office, stunned, an inmate friend of mine named John was pissed off. I don't know what's going on, but some asshole is getting out in the morning, so they won't let me make my phone call. It was me. I agreed to be quietly released the next morning, November 3rd, 1977, and that Sharon would pick me up alone, minus the roar of 100 Hells Angels on wheels. After my 5 years in Folsom, I didn't really mind being released without fanfare. Getting out immediately sure beats counting down another 120 days, the last mile being the toughest. Sharon picked me up in a brand new Corvette. She sure looked good. We left Folsom and never came back. It's considered bad luck among ex-cons to revisit any prison you've done time in. All in all, I figure when I'm too old to ride a motorcycle or go to bed with a pretty girl, rather than retire to an old soldier's home, I'd just as soon go back to prison. In prison, they treat the old convicts with respect. They buy you cigarettes and ice cream and listen to your stories. That sounds a hell of a lot more fun than playing Scrabble with the geriatrics. When I walked out of Folsom a free man, I could only imagine how pissed off and frustrated the feds were to see me back on the streets riding my motorcycle and wearing my colors. Within a year, the Federales secretly geared up for round 2. They had a brand new weapon aimed at shutting down the Hells Angels MC in one fell swoop. It was called RICO. 12. RICO my ass. The law with the funny name. There was once a cop in the Solano County Sheriff's Office named William Zerby, working closely with the DEA and the FBI. He took to acting like an FBI agent, sometimes tailing our Oakland members. Zerby and I never crossed paths, but while working with all his federal friends in February of 1978, Zerby locked horns with a Hells Angel named James Jim Brondis. Worried about the dangerous complications stemming from his work, each day Zerby would come out of his house and walk over and stand at a certain spot to start his car by remote control. Zerby was one careful cop, except one morning, the day he was on his way to the Solano County Court to testify against Jim over drug and weapons charges. He was standing at his usual spot, working the remote. Instead of the car blowing up, there was an explosion near the spot where he stood. Although seriously injured, he barely escaped death. At the same time, down the road in San Jose, a police sergeant named Kroc was also injured by a bomb. Kroc had also arrested Jim. By the spring of 1978, a grand jury investigation was put on the Zerby bombing. Around this time, I was finishing up 4 months in county jail for parole violation. I was taken to Solano County to testify before the grand jury. I didn't know they were interested in the Zerby bombing. All I knew was that the law had sent me somewhere against my will, so when they asked me my name, I told them, "Fuck you." The DA was angry. Another comment like that, he warned, and I could be further incarcerated. I had leg irons with a waist chain and handcuffs, and I was chained to the chair. Being a Folsom prison graduate, I asked him, "What are you gonna do, put more chains on me?" Even the fucking DA laughed. They dragged my ass in front of a judge who ordered me to talk, or they would hold me in contempt. I told him my middle name was Contempt, and said he had no reason to hold me. I'd been kidnapped out of county jail, my lawyer didn't know where I was, and I wouldn't be saying anything, since I didn't recognize this court. "Stick the whole fucking system up your ass," was my comment. The judge cited me for contempt and had me hauled off to a nearby jail. Word spread that I was in the grand jury room because there were other club members and friends subpoenaed too. They had seen me chained, led down the hallway into the jury room. The cops still wouldn't tell my lawyer, Kent Russell, where I was, so he went to another judge to file a missing person report. The next day I was back in Alameda County Jail, no contempt charge. Officially, I'd never left county jail. While there were never any indictments on the Zerby bombings, it hit too close to home for law enforcement people to ignore. The state and local cops had been coming down regularly on the Hells Angels for drug and weapons charges. More often than not, armed with our lawyers to battle the system, we walked away. The law was getting pretty frustrated with our cat and mouse games. The government was also pissed off that I would not break my association from the club after I got out of jail, but I refused to play their game. Many prison parolees would have bent to the government's will and erred on the side of caution and kept their distance from a highly publicized group like the Hells Angels. But even though I was no longer officially an officer of the Oakland chapter, many people perceived me as being a figurehead